Today we're talking about U.S. politics and how it's changed over the years. You know, when I think about gaming and how it's changed, I remember encountering an Apple II computer, 5.25 floppy disks. It was a whole different kind of a world in the mid-90s versus computing today. Simple adventure games seemed incredible to me at the time. Maybe because they were amazing games, or maybe just because I was easily amazed. But certainly one thing about that time was that computers were an addition onto the social constructs of society. They were a fun tool that people enjoyed as part of their broader lives. Whereas today, technology has evolved to the point where technology has become the foundation of our lives, and it's abnormal to disconnect. And I think that has really had a very big effect on the way we approach things like politics and economics in the Western world. I think about how I encounter younger people today who in some cases aren't even familiar with how to touch type on a computer keyboard because they've spent their entire youth interacting with touchscreen phones and tablets only. So even legacy PC gaming experiences in some cases are becoming foreign to younger people as their technology becomes more something they wear than something that they interact with in a premeditated and dedicated way. In the 90s, if you had a computer, you would go over to the corner desk and you'd log on to the internet, and it was really a very concerted activity. It was something that you would plan to do, something you would look forward to doing. And then when you got a chance to go spend time on the computer, that's what you were doing. You weren't really distracted by anything else. And by the same measure, if you were doing other things in life, the computer wasn't a distraction. The computer had a dedicated place in the home, but it wasn't a replacement for your everyday life. Whereas today, you can browse the web from the palm of your hand very easily, perhaps even more easily than at a desktop computer. You can just pull out your phone and Google something and find out what you wanted to know. That sense of continual connection, the social media age, I think all of it has really changed the way we look at the world. And something has seemed really wrong to me with politics in the last few years. When I was a child, I think about the earliest president that I remember would have been Bill Clinton. And I didn't know anything about him other than I kind of heard through the grapevine about the Monica Lewinsky scandal. That was it. But I didn't really know what that was about because I was just a kid. So, you know, it was what it was. But I had this idea of what a president was, I guess, supposed to be like. A representative of a high office. And it seems like Bill Clinton represented that office pretty well. He seemed like a presidential figure, if that makes sense. And I'm not saying he was good or he was bad. I'm just saying in terms of the way he represented the office he was in, it seemed like he had a level of professional dignity. That doesn't mean that that carried over into his personal life. It doesn't mean that he wasn't a slimy guy. But he would act presidential. And I felt like George W. Bush was basically the same way. George W. Bush Jr. was presidential in the way he would speak. Sometimes he would come across as a little bit of a bumbling, down-home Texan boy kind of a deal. Like, that's kind of how he'd come across, and then he would make little gaffes from time to time. But overall, his way of representing the office of the President of the United States was dignified, it was professional, and it really felt like if the president said something, you would pay attention. If the president came to town, you would want to see that and be part of that. It just felt very meaningful. And then we had Barack Obama. And Barack Obama was the first president that I was actually able to vote for, because I was old enough to vote for Barack Obama. And I was really enamored of Barack Obama. He seemed like he was very well spoken. I loved the way he would make these rousing speeches that were very unifying in the way they sounded. But then as time passed, I also noticed that there was a little bit of a shift in the way he conducted himself as a president. He was more casual. He was that first president that decided, okay, I'm going to be on Twitter. And I remember thinking, you're on Twitter? Like, that doesn't sound like the place where a president would be. Like, the president is going to be tweeting now? I guess. That's cool. So, it just seemed kind of cool, I guess. The president is on Twitter. He's up with the technology. He's connected with the crowd, So, at the time, I thought that seemed pretty cool. But then, it just really seemed like something shifted. We got Donald Trump, who seemed like he wasn't presidential at all. And maybe on some level, his policies are good. Maybe on some level, I appreciate things he has to say or even agree with them. But you can't get around the fact that a lot of the things that come out of his mouth don't sound like the kind of thing you would expect a president to say. And then we got, of course, Joe Biden. And Joe Biden comes from the era of old politics, certainly, being that he is an old man. And yet, again, it's been very rare for us to hear anything come out of the mouth of the president that actually sounds presidential. Most of what Joe Biden says sounds like it came out of the retirement home or something. Like, he just does not speak well because he's well past his prime. That's the bottom line, I believe. And, I guess what comes to mind is this concept of the dead internet theory. And that theory was basically that at a certain point, everything on the internet just became sort of copy-pasted in an echo chamber, and there stopped being any original content because it was basically just the internet replicating content within itself. Kind of like if you turned it loose to AI bots and they just made content amongst each other, for each other, to each other. And there weren't really any real people or original ideas to be found anymore. And I know it's felt a little bit like that as we've seen more and more an overwhelming amount of content available, and yet that sense that there's not really very much original content to be found. Maybe that's why in my personal life I find myself maybe watching a few of my favorite YouTubers, but I don't really watch movies and TV shows anymore because I never feel like I see anything that looks truly original. It's either something I've seen before, or it feels like it's just a reimagining or a retelling of a story that's already been told. And just as the internet feels like it's come a long ways from what it was in the mid-90s, but it's also lost its authenticity along the way. The same thing seems to be the case with our political scene. We still have people running for office. We still have people in those offices. And yet, that traditional, conventional image of what it means to represent the office of the President of the United States feels like it's been eroded on both sides of the political table. Regardless of what good or bad you see in either of the candidates that are available. Very seldom do we really feel a reason to believe that we're ushering in a new era. And more it feels like we're just at the end of what once was a great era. It feels like somehow we've stalled. We're a bubble that's beginning to pop. Things just feel inflated. Inflated in the sense that everyone's ego is bigger, but the content of their heart is smaller. Companies are bigger than ever before, and profits are higher than ever before. And yet, it seems like wherever you go, there's that nostalgic feeling of missing things to some degree as they were. Now, maybe some of that is my age talking. As a millennial, I have to face the reality that my perspective on life comes from someone not who is a young adult, but as who is middle-aged. So my perspective is different because I remember more history than someone who's 18 or 20 years old. My perspective is different. And so I have to kind of stand corrected on some level and say, okay, well, to a point, it's just my perspective, because the younger you are, the more idealistic you are, the less perspective you have, so you wind up being more idealistic and also more naive. So there's that. But I really feel like technology itself is the real reason why everything feels just a little bit fake. Because technology has become something which defines us instead of being something that we define. In a sense, we're starting to lose control of our sense of self as individuals and as a society, as technology and the various mutations of it slowly redefine who we are. And you can't avoid that. It's just like going from the era of horse-drawn carriages before electricity to the modern age with automobiles. Change happens, and change changes us. That's common sense. The question, I guess, is, do we allow things that should be tools in our lives to become things that use us instead? And if so, how do we retain our authenticity? How do we stay true to the parts of our heritage and tradition which we should cherish and value and cling to, while also being willing to embrace the hope and possibility of the future? I'm not quite sure I have an answer to that, but I do think that we should have some level of pause in the degree to which we believe that technology should be the solution to every problem. Maybe we should put a pause on believing that everything should be viewed through the lens of social media and all of the fickle things that make trends rise and fall in the blink of an eye. There was a time when you wouldn't know most of the news of the world because the only access to news you probably had was a printed newspaper. There was delay. There was a locality to this. It took time for a news cycle to process information. But today, if something happens on the other side of the world, we can watch it live immediately. We form our positions, our interests, our support for political candidates, not based off of a slow-moving guidance, but rather off of memes that travel around rapidly, that usually don't include much fact and are heavy on clickbait. We don't really judge people fairly. Not that we ever did. It's just, I guess maybe there was a time when we didn't judge people as much because we didn't know as much about them. And now, we still don't know very much. But technology's sense of perpetual connection makes us feel like we know everything. And so there's a lot of people who aren't qualified on any level whatsoever, but they're keyboard warriors, and they have such firm, steadfast opinions about things that they know nothing about. Maybe that's what it is. It's that ignorance has been on the rise along with technology, because technology somehow makes it so that you don't have to know as much. You don't have to know how to do adding, subtracting, and dividing with a pencil on a piece of paper because you have a smartphone that you can talk to. You don't need to know how to do it when you can just Google it. And what happens when we become ignorant of politics? We don't understand the spirit of it. We don't understand it on a macro level. But we do have access to a lot of small, insignificant pieces of data, whether they're true or made up. We have access to all sorts of things at the touch of a button, but we don't grasp the true meaning of a thing. There was a time when we would read books. You'd read a history book, cover to cover, and it would be boring, but you'd come out with some sort of an understanding of the history of the world. And now we can Google the history of anything. But what we know is limited to what we're able to glean in a few 3-paragraph long chunks in a Wikipedia article. It's just not the same. When you try to coordinate something which is going to define decades of the future for society and for our country, and you're doing it in small bite-sized transactions with an attention span that doesn't last more than 30 seconds, how do you address big issues when your attention span is so small? This problem probably carries over into gaming. Like I was talking about how much I love those old King's Quest games from the 90s that I played. And you know what? They weren't that great of games, but they were amazing because they were what I had. And so I spent many hours thinking about them, immersing myself in that world, becoming more familiar with them. They felt real, they felt special because time went by slower. I wasn't distracted by 130 other titles in my Steam library and a whole bunch more that are on the weekend Steam sale. So I got to know those few simple games and I fell in love with them, and they played a role in shaping my worldview even. Probably, if there is a solution to all of this, is that we need to work on having longer attention spans. We need to stop being distracted by hundreds and thousands of different small stimuli. Looking at society and the world and politics and gaming and everything else, relationships, careers, looking at all of it through the lens of thinking that in order for something to be good, it's got to capture our attention in the first 30 seconds. We need to eliminate noise in our lives, have fewer things occupying our attention, and spend more time getting to know those few things fully, instead of kind of dabbling in everything and being a master of nothing. It's learning to read a book again, like cover to cover. You pick up a book and you read it. It's picking that one game that you're going to play for a while, and then you actually keep on playing it and you see it through, instead of playing it for a few hours and then losing interest and jumping to another one. It's building relationships with the intention that you plan for them to last for many years, not just this weekend. It's having the willingness to believe that you aren't necessarily right, to know that to truly understand something requires a great deal of study and knowledge and personal development. And you can't possibly get the full picture from a few memes that people share on Facebook, because technology while it does allow us to move faster, doesn't change the fact that human ability to process things is just about the same speed as it's ever been. So, what we really need to do is learn to consume things, not at the speed that they come to us, but at the speed we're able to digest them, to truly understand them, and to form an educated opinion. And until we've done that, we owe it to ourselves and others to be open-minded and to embrace the philosophy that the spirit of true justice is the spirit which is not too certain that it's right. As always, try to be pragmatic, try to be wise, and slow down enough to make decisions which are meaningful in a world which often tries to throw things at us so fast that we don't really have a chance to understand. Till next time, good luck on your journey. Thanks for watching.